One time I invited Dr. Wilson and Nancy, his wife, over for family dinner. And my oldest daughter was probably about 9 or 10 at the time. And Dr. Wilson was a true family practice doctor. So he really had a way with children. And in fact, even the young teenagers in the community garden, Dr. Wilson would call the boys Sue, and he would call the girls Bob, and little kids, he would always say to them, boy, I really like those purple shoes, and the shoes would be green or yellow, and the kids would just look at him like, what are you talking about? Or he would be like, I really like those shoes, can I have them? And the kids would look at him and they would say, they're not gonna fit you, Mr. Wilson. And he would say, well, I can wear them on my ears. So he was always joking around with kids. And it was no different at my dinner table that night. He was pulling Sirius's leg all night long, nonstop, and he was doing fun little things like he would get a piece of paper and pen and he would write the word pig, and then he would turn it into a drawing of a pig, and I mean, all kinds of stuff. So I made a blackberry cobbler for dessert because Dr. Wilson had told me that that's one of his favorite desserts. And we are having dessert, and Dr. Wilson looks over at my oldest daughter, and everybody's got their beautiful bowl of blackberry cobbler dolloped with whipped cream, and he looks over at Sirius and he says, do you know what a blackberry cobbler louse is? And Sirius looks over at him really skeptically and she goes, no. And Dr. Wilson takes his spoon and dives it into her bowl and grabs a big old scoop of it and eats it and says to her, I got him.
My first story about Dr. Wilson that I remember is the community garden started over at Lake Tomahawk, and he spent a lot of time restoring Lake Tomahawk and planning the entire park out. He had blueprints of every plant that he planted at Lake Tomahawk, and he came into my office one day and unfolded the blueprints, rolled them out on my desk, and completely blew me away and overwhelmed me with all of the information that he had, and was talking about expanding the gardens over there and places that he could do it, and ways that he could implement this or that. But it was just a perfect story about him and the way he was very meticulous and thoughtful, and just wanted to leave something for the community.
Dr. Wilson I found to be a very reachable person, even though he was from a different generation from most of us here at the garden. I found him to be very gracious, and anytime he was teaching anything to me or anyone else around me, he was very gracious and not over-explaining, and just was a very reachable person, a very calm, reachable person, and I really appreciated that about him.
John was a master woodworker, and when we built our house in 1977, he gifted us with the mantle for our fireplace, and it's just a constant reminder of his wonderful friendship.
And I would come here and Dr. Wilson would be just a dynamo of energy, and he was also a font of knowledge. He just loved to tell you about any stories about the garden and how he got here and what his work was, what he brought to the garden was amazing. He just had a real passion and love for this garden. And my favorite story of Dr. Wilson was, we used to have an old pump that was in the river. There was a pump that sat on top of the bank, and there was a hose that went down into the river, and that hose got plugged. And so I told Dr. Wilson I would run back to my car and get my old dirty tennis shoes and jump in the creek, jump in the Swannanoa River. And I ran to the car, got my shoes, ran back. By the time I got back to the pump, Dr. Wilson was already in the river. He was like 90, he was close to probably mid-80s at the time. And he just he couldn't wait for me to get back. He just wanted to get that water running. So he went down there and he pulled that big hose out and he got all the gook out of it and put it back, and I never did get down there to help him.
We moved to Monterey the very same year that John and Nancy arrived in Black Mountain. The year was 1975. We met on a tennis court and enjoyed a close, rich relationship for a span of 40+ years. If I was asked to describe John in just a couple of words, servant heart best sums up the essence of who he really was. I'm pretty sure you could speak to many people who knew John and had a relationship with him, and they could tell you endless stories of the ways he enriched their lives. But his service to others didn't stop just with people he knew, but they had a ripple effect really all the way across the world.
I first met Dr. Wilson when we moved here. I was about 12 years old, and we lived across the lake from him. And we met him and his sister and brother-in-law, and they had all grown up in Korea to missionary parents, and they were very special people. And we sure enjoyed working with John, and he would have a lot of special projects to work on. And I believe his faith in Christ was a central part of his joy of serving others, and his unselfishness and generosity.
One summer we built a swimming pool at our house, and John loved to swim, and after a day of gardening it was great to have a swim. So he was the very first person who was a non-family member to swim in our pool. So as we're walking to the pool, I said, John, we have just one rule: no diving. There was a 10-foot deep end, but I still was afraid that if people died, I just didn't want any accidents over there. So we get to the pool deck, and I hear the splash. In the shallow end of the pool, the 3-foot section, John is doing a shallow dive into the pool, and he emerged with that great big grin on his face, just like a kid.
I met Dr. Wilson in 2008. I was coming off a pretty serious health crisis and a very toxic work relationship, and so I found a good home here at this garden under the mentorship of Dr. Wilson and of course Diana McCall. First years here, I had one plot and then 2 plots. I did a plot with my sister, and then the following year I actually started my own business, Becky's Bounty, and I really credit Dr. Wilson and Diana with setting me on that path of doing something that I really loved.